Rick Ross looked directly into the camera and told Curtis Jackson that Curtis Jackson's own dead mother was rolling in her grave over sneakers. Let me say that again so the sentence lands the way the sentence needs to land. A man worth $100 million. A man who calls himself the biggest boss. A man who built an entire brand on being untouchable, picked up a phone at night, and used another man's dead mother as a punchline because a pair of $130 Reebok sold out too fast. And the craziest part? That sentence right there is not even close to the wildest thing that happened in the last 2 weeks between Rick Ross and 50 Cent. Because buried inside this feud, hidden under the Costco jokes, the sold-out claims, the bankruptcy receipts, the Verzuz equity bombshell, and the screaming matches about whether a rapper is allowed to be hot at 60, there is a number. One number. A number nobody in this fight wants to talk about. And by the end of this video, that number is going to tell you exactly who won this war, and the answer is not who you think the answer is. Stay with me, because this story starts with a shoe and ends with a legacy, and everything in the middle is absolute chaos. Here is what you need to know before any of this makes sense. On August 20th, 2026, Reebok brought back the G-Unit G6, the exact sneaker that 50 Cent and Reebok first dropped back in 2003 when Get Rich or Die Tryin' was swallowing the entire music industry whole. The new version kept everything. Premium white leather. Gray suede toe cap. The red, white, and blue hits. G-Unit stamped on the heel. The silver G6 lace lock. That icy outsole. $130. A time capsule you can wear on your feet. And according to the reports, the entire online inventory vanished in under 2 hours. Some people inside the G-Unit camp are saying certain pairs were gone in minutes. Sold out. Completely. Globally. Now hold that thought, because I need you to remember one thing about this entire story. Everything you are about to hear, every insult, every joke, every late-night rant, every single word of this war, traces back to those 2 hours. 120 minutes. That is the fuse on this bomb. Because the moment those sneakers sold out, 50 Cent did what 50 Cent always does. Curtis Jackson picked up a phone, opened Instagram, pointed the camera at the shoes, and aimed the entire moment directly at Rick Ross. Sold out, fat boy. That was the caption energy. That was the message. 50 Cent thanked the G-Unit fans, called the comeback nostalgic for hip-hop, and then dropped the line that would echo through everything that followed. Men lie, women lie, numbers do not. And to be fair to 50 Cent, the numbers were loud. Tony Yayo went live on The Real Report with Tony Yayo, and Yayo was practically levitating. Yayo said 50 Cent could sell anything on a stick. Yayo said the proof is in the pudding, that everybody in New York rides with 50 Cent, that nobody needed bots to sell these records, and nobody needed bots to sell these sneakers. Uncle Murda jumped in and said the outcome was no shock at all, because Uncle Murda has stood on stages with 50 Cent all over the world and watched the crowds with Uncle Murda's own eyes. If the man can pack arenas internationally, why would a sneaker connected to the biggest album run of the 2000s be any different? That was the G-Unit position. Clean. Confident. Victorious. But Rick Ross was watching. And Rick Ross did not see a victory. Rick Ross saw something else entirely. Rick Ross saw a lie. At least, that is what Rick Ross told the world. William Roberts got on camera and tore the entire celebration apart piece by piece. Ross said Ross personally checked with the top 3 sneaker stores in the game, and not one of those stores had the G-Unit sneakers. Ross said there is no reseller moving the shoes. Ross said nobody is buying them. And then Ross said the line that turned a clowning session into a headline. If the G6 really sold out in 3 hours, then Reebok must have only had 200 pairs for sale. 200 pairs. That was the accusation. Manufactured scarcity. A fake sellout. A marketing illusion designed to make a 51-year-old rapper look like a retail king. And then Ross reached back 25 years and pulled the oldest weapon in the crate. Ross reminded everybody that 50 Cent filed a $100 million bankruptcy when the last G-Unit shoe deal was running, that Jay-Z ran Puma while 50 Cent was doing endorsement deals, and that Curtis Jackson has been repeating the same playbook for a quarter of a century. And then Ross said the sentence, "I am disappointed in you, Curtis. Your mama turning over in her grave. Now I need you to understand something about rap beef. Rap beef has rules. Unwritten, but real. You can talk about money. You can talk about sales. You can talk about a man's career, a man's label, a man's crew, a man's clothes, a man's watch, a man's house. But Sabrina Jackson died when Curtis Jackson was 8 years old. That is not material. That is not ammunition. That is a line, and Rick Ross sprinted across the line over a sneaker. And here is where the story bends, because 50 Cent did not respond with anger. 50 Cent responded with something much colder. See, weeks before the sneakers ever dropped, 50 Cent had sat down with Ebro Darden and casually laid out a philosophy that was secretly a loaded weapon. 50 Cent said hip-hop culture is connected to youth culture. 50 Cent said, you are not supposed to be the hottest in anything at 60 years old. 50 Cent said Curtis Jackson is not trying to be in the way anymore. And on the surface, that sounds like maturity. That sounds like a mogul aging gracefully. But listen closer, because 50 Cent also said something in that same conversation that detonated a week later. When the room asked 50 Cent about doing a Verzuz, 50 Cent said the advantage would belong to whoever stood across from Curtis Jackson, because 50 Cent clearly dominated during 50 Cent's era. 50 Cent called that era haunting. 50 Cent called that run uncomfortable for everybody else. So uncomfortable that people pretend the whole run was one record, when really the entire industry could not look away. That is not a retired man talking. That is a man setting a trap. Because when you say the game belongs to the young, and then your 23-year-old sneaker sells out in 2 hours, you get to have the crown both ways. You get to be the wise elder and the reigning king at the same time. Genius. Textbook 50 Cent. And Rick Ross knew exactly what was happening, which is why Ross countered with the sharpest argument Ross has made in years. Ross rejected the entire premise. Ross said when the streets love you, when the culture needs you, when you bring something that cannot be duplicated, age is irrelevant. And Ross did not reach for theory. Ross reached for Bun B. Ross said Bun B just hit the stage, and the South would never let Bun B stop rapping. Ross said if Pimp C was alive, nobody in the South would tell Pimp C to stop rapping. Ross said legends like Bun B and Pimp C could drop albums at 85, and the culture would still show up. And whether you ride with Ross or not, you have to admit something uncomfortable here. That argument is strong. That argument might be the strongest thing to come out of this entire feud, because the argument exposes the crack in 50 Cent's philosophy. 50 Cent says hip-hop belongs to the youth. But 50 Cent still tours internationally to sold-out crowds. 50 Cent still trends every time Curtis Jackson opens Curtis Jackson's mouth. 50 Cent's 23-year-old sneaker just sold out in 2 hours. If the game truly belongs to the young, why is a 51-year-old man's 23-year-old shoe outselling albums by active artists? Rick Ross looked at all of that and concluded that 50 Cent's youth argument is not wisdom. The argument is an excuse. An excuse a man builds when the man does not want to compete musically anymore. And then Ross flipped the whole board over with a single sentence. A sentence so surgical, so quietly devastating, that the sentence reframed the entire fight. Ross said, wow, the public may not know I own equity in Verzuz. Let that sit for a second. Because if that claim is real, the claim changes the physics of everything. Think about the geometry. The culture has been begging for a 50 Cent Verzuz for years. That stage is the one arena where 50 Cent's catalog is guaranteed to dominate. The one room where 20 years of hits become a weapon again. And Rick Ross just told the world that Rick Ross owns a piece of the platform. Which means if 50 Cent ever does a Verzuz, some portion of that moment, some slice of that revenue, flows back to Rick Ross. Ross even joked about the arrangement. Ross said, "Thanks for your employment, Curtis." Ross said next time Ross will make sure 50 Cent has a Bel Air bottle on stage. That is not trolling. That is chess. That is a man telling an enemy that every road the enemy walks leads through property Ross owns. And this is the pattern underneath the whole feud, the thing most people are missing while the internet argues about sneakers. Watch the moves. When 50 Cent talks album sales, Ross talks ownership. When Ross talks property, 50 Cent talks business credibility. When 50 Cent says old rappers should step aside, Ross asks why 50 Cent built a philosophy that conveniently excuses 50 Cent from competing. Neither man ever answers the other man's actual argument. The two men just keep changing the category. Sales become sneakers. Sneakers become equity. Equity becomes legacy. And legacy is the only thing either man has actually been fighting about since 2009. And the receipts on both sides are real, which is what makes this so impossible to call. On 50 Cent's side, the G6 reportedly sold out in under 2 hours at $130 a pair. The original G-Unit Reebok run was one of the biggest celebrity sneaker deals ever, because G-Unit had real input on design, marketing, and presentation instead of just leasing out a name. 50 Cent built a television empire with power, used record-breaking ratings to negotiate ownership participation in the franchise through G-Unit Film and Television, and turned a 9-time shooting survivor from Queens into a global brand that can tour internationally decades after the last hit album. On Ross's side, Maybach Music Group. Wingstop locations. The 235-acre Georgia estate, the biggest single-family home in the state, bought from foreclosure. The Bel Air partnership. And now, allegedly, equity in Verzuz itself. Ross's album Set in Stone debuted at number 39 on the Billboard 200 with roughly 19,000 equivalent album units, and 50 Cent weaponized that number instantly, because of course 50 Cent did. But Ross countered that streaming-era numbers are inflated for some artists and meaningless as a scoreboard when a man has built businesses outside music. And that is where the Ross argument gets teeth. Because the same week Ross's album did 19,000, 50 Cent's sneakers sold out in 2 hours, and both of those facts are being used by both sides to claim total victory. Men lie, women lie, numbers do not. But what happens when the numbers are lying too? Now remember that number I promised you at the top of this video. Here the number comes. Because the detail that nobody in this feud wants to sit with is the 200. Ross's 200. When Ross said Reebok must have only had 200 pairs for sale, Ross accidentally revealed the entire game. Think about what that accusation actually means. Forget whether the number is real. What matters is what the accusation admits. The accusation admits that scarcity is the whole trick. The accusation admits that in 2026, a sellout is not a measurement of demand. A sellout is a decision. A supply decision. And once you see that machinery, you cannot unsee the machinery, because the machinery applies to everything. Album units are a supply decision manufactured by bundles and playlist placements and streaming farms. Sneaker sellouts are a supply decision manufactured by limited runs. Even attention is a supply decision, and nobody on earth manufactures scarcity of attention better than 50 Cent, a man who releases almost no music, does almost no traditional press, and still dominates every news cycle Curtis Jackson touches. So who won? Here is the verdict nobody wants to say out loud. The sneakers won. Reebok won. Verzuz won. The platforms won. Two 50-something men turned a $130 retro shoe into a week of free global advertising for every brand either man has ever touched, and the two men pulled it off by selling the one product that never runs out, the feud itself. Ross called 50 Cent a liar. 50 Cent called Ross a flop. And both men went to sleep richer than the day before. That is the real scoreboard. That is the number behind the number. The G6 did not sell out in 2 hours despite the beef. The G6 sold out because of the beef. And let me paint the scale of what the G6 comeback really means, because the context matters more than the trolling. In 2003, the original G-Unit sneaker was not a side hustle. The shoe was a declaration. 50 Cent stood at the center of the biggest debut run in rap history, and Reebok did not just license a logo. Reebok handed G-Unit real creative control, real input on design, real say in how the product moved. That structure was almost unheard of at the time, and that structure is exactly why the shoe meant something then and means something now. Fast forward 23 years. The industry has changed completely. Albums are streams. Tours are data. Sneakers are content. And yet the same white leather silhouette from 2003 can still clear a global inventory in one afternoon, which tells you the G-Unit brand is not nostalgia. The G-Unit brand is infrastructure. That is what Tony Yeo understood instantly on the podcast. Yeo compared G-Unit's pull to Nas, to Wu-Tang, to Jay-Z, to Biggie, the names whose music does not age because the music is welded to a specific feeling in people's lives. When you buy the G6, you are not buying leather. You are buying 2003. You are buying the summer of Indie Club. You are buying the version of yourself that existed when that album dropped. And Rick Ross knows that, which is exactly why Ross worked so hard to frame the sellout as fake. Ross was not disputing a shoe count. Ross was disputing the mythology. Because if the mythology holds, then 50 Cent's entire youth culture argument collapses under the weight of 50 Cent's own numbers, and Ross's argument about ageless relevance wins by default. That is the real chessboard. The sneakers were never the point. The sneakers were the scoreboard. There is also a detail from the Tony Yeo podcast that deserves its own spotlight, because the detail explains G-Unit's entire operating system. Yeo told the story about how serious 50 Cent was during the original Reebok run. If a member of the crew failed to wear the sneakers when the crew was supposed to wear the sneakers, that was real money walking out the door. 50 Cent checked people about the shoes. Personally. Back then, the sneakers were discipline. Now the sneakers are legacy. And when the G6 sold out in 2026, Yeo was already joking that Reebok might need to bring new money to the table because G-Unit was doing Reebok's marketing job all over again for free. Think about that flex. The artist is telling the corporation that the artist's name outperforms the corporation's entire advertising department. And the wildest part? The sales numbers suggest Yeo might be right. Reebok did not buy billboards for the G6 comeback. 50 Cent bought attention with one Instagram video aimed at Rick Ross, and the internet did the rest. That is the 50 Cent playbook in its purest form. Never advertise a product when you can weaponize a rivalry instead. Every shot at Ross was a commercial. Every Ross response was free distribution. The feud is the funnel. The beef is the billboard. And both men know exactly what both men are doing, which is why neither man ever stops. And still, underneath all the theater, there is one moment in this story that is not theater at all. That line about 50 Cent's mother. Because whatever you think about the numbers, the marketing, the equity plays, the legacy arguments, there is something genuinely heavy about watching a 20-year rivalry reach the point where a dead parent becomes a talking point in a sneaker dispute. Hip-hop beef has always been cruel. Cruel is the genre. But there is a difference between cruel about a man's catalog and cruel about the woman who raised a boy and left before that boy turned 9. And maybe that is the real answer to the question both of these men keep circling. Not who sold more. Not who owns more. But what is all of this for? 50 Cent told Ebro that Curtis Jackson is not trying to be in the way. Ross told the world that the culture decides when you are done, not the calendar. Both of those are philosophies about the same fear. The fear of being forgotten. The fear that one day the 2 hours becomes 2 minutes becomes nothing. So here is what I want from you. Get in the comments and tell me who actually won this round. Was the winner 50 Cent, with a 23-year-old sneaker that vanished in 2 hours, and a youth philosophy that conveniently excuses Curtis Jackson from ever having to compete again? Or was the winner Rick Ross, with the Verzuz equity bomb, the 200-pair accusation, and an argument about ageless relevance that honestly might be the smartest thing anyone has said in this feud since the feud started? And one more question, the one I actually care about. Did Ross cross a line that cannot be uncrossed, or is everything fair when the scoreboard is legacy? Drop your verdict below. If you want the next chapter the second that chapter breaks, because with these two there is always a next chapter, subscribe and hit the bell. That is the reality on the ground. That is the reality on the ground.